Hello class, welcome to this module's lecture, and for this particular lecture what we're going to be talking about is chapter 8, when we're talking a little bit more about strings and special methods that are related to strings. So it's kind of a lengthy chapter, so let's dive right on in and hit the high points. So according to your book, we have used this in the past, the string class is a special class that's built into Python that enables us to manipulate text. And so we did a few things in chapter 3 related to strings, but now we want to go a little bit deeper and share with you some of the things that we can do with strings. And so let's just kind of dive in with this first example here. In this, we declare a new string object called S1. S1 equals a string with an empty constructor there. And what that does is that creates an empty string object. And so it exists, it's allocated in memory. But there's nothing that is initialized in that string. But if we wanted to declare a new string object with something initialized, we would do something like this. So let's create a string called S2 equals str, and then just like we do in print, we'll put our text in double quotation marks, and so the value welcome is stored in S2. Well, what happens if we set string 1, the value of string 1, to welcome? Would that not be S2 to be equal to S1? And the answer is no, because like objects, strings are immutable. That means they cannot change. And so the reference in memory does not change. And so we can kind of prove that even though the values are the same, the reference in memory is not. So we have two lines of code here where we say the ID of S1 is, and then we do the function ID, which gives us the location in memory, or the unique identifier for string 1, and then we say the identifier for string 2 is. And so let me run it. And when I run it, you can see that the ID of S1 is this number, and the ID of S2 is this number. So they are completely different objects stored in memory, even though the value is exactly the same. All right, next example. There are a lot. Your book goes into great detail, and I'm going to cover everything that's in your book for every last little function, because that's something that you should be able to kind of figure out. But I'm going to hit kind of the highlights of what some of the things that you can do with functions with strings. So right now we're just going to create a brand new string called S with the value welcome. And then you can use, there are several functions that we'll talk about. You can, if you want to find out the length of a string, you can use the len function, and then as an argument we'll use s, and when we run this, it will tell us how long or how many characters that the s string is worth. And then we can use max s and min s to find out the character that has the highest ASCII value, and that that ASCII is a computer code that allows us to map a specific binary code, or I'm sorry, hexadecimal code to a specific character. So we can find the character in S that has the highest ASCII value by using max S, and then the minimum in S. And so we'll run that through that. We can also do some interesting things to find out, maybe we want to find out if S has an odd or an even length of characters. Well, this is kind of an interesting thing, and you might use this from time to time in your programming. If the length of S divided by 2 equals 0, then print S contains an even length of characters. Let's kind of run through that. So welcome has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so 7 divided by, or I'm sorry, 7 modulus 2, okay, is if that's equal to 0, then well, we know that 7 divided by 2 gives us a remainder of 1. And so it's not going. So that's going to be false here. So it's not going to be even. So else it's going to print out that it's an odd length of characters. So let's run this, and we can see all of these little functions in action. I thought that I saved this. All right. All right. So if we want to, let's try that. Let's try this. That way you can kind of see how these work in action. let's run it. All right, so the first thing, the length of S indeed is 7. The character in S that has the highest ASCII value is little o, and the lowest ASCII value is capital W. And then again, using this last little bit of code here, determine whether the value of the string is even or odd. And we know that there's 7 characters in this, so welcome contains an odd length of characters. So kind of some interesting things that you can do with the length. So we know that strings are sequences of characters, and what you may not know is that those characters are indexed based. You may have taken other programming classes where you look at things like arrays, but similarly strings in Python are index based, and that index starts with 0, and they can range from 0 to the length of S minus 1. So say, for example, we're looking at a string called welcome, and kind of ignore the spaces between, but assume that they're all together. So if we have the word welcome, then the index of the W is 0, the index of the E is 1, L is 2, and so forth, all the way to the end. And so 6 is the very last one, and so since there are 7, the very last index, since there are 7, we know that 7 characters in welcome, we know that that 6 is the length of S minus 1. So the length of S is 7 minus 1. So that's how we kind of determine that very last one. So this refers to each character in a string has an exact index. Now you can directly reference the index of a string by referencing it directly. So what if we were to say S equals to welcome, print S, and then in brackets 4? Then what we should get when we print this out is we should get O, because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And then you can also use a for loop to extract specific values of a string. Okay? So if this is kind of interesting. So for I in range, and then we have three different arguments here. The first one has to do with where we're starting through the length of S, and then go every 2 characters. And then what we want to do is we want to print the value of I as we loop through that string, and we want to tell it to end whenever we have no more letters. So let's run this and let's take a look at it. All right. So again, S4, the value of S4 is O, because that's the accompanying value. And so look what happened with this loop. So we started at 0 with W, okay? Then we forwarded 2, so we have L, and 2 more is O, and then 2 more is E. And indeed that is correct how it parsed through that. WLOE is how this particular piece of code parsed through the string welcome. So you can kind of use those things. This isn't particularly helpful or functional, but you might have a case where you need to loop through a string to extract a specific value, and you might find that helpful at some point during this class. All right, so some other things you can do with strings are the slicing operator, which for that particular operator, it goes in brackets with the value of the start index, with colon, and then the index, and lets you reference specific pieces of a string and select them at a specified index. So say, for example, let's assume welcome, and then we want to print the value of S from 1 to 4. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we should get Elko out of this. You can also concatenate or join 2 strings using the plus operator, or you can use the multiplication operator or the asterisk operator to print out multiple values of a string. So let's assume S1 equals welcome, S2 equals friends, and then what we can do is we can say the value of S3 is equal to S1, so we'd have the word welcome, then plus, so we're concatenating the word all with spaces on either side, and then S2, which is friends. So it should, when we print out S3, it should say welcome all friends. And then another thing is we declared S4, and then we can say print out the value of S1 3 times in a row. okay, and then print out S4. And let's look at what that looks like. All right, so here we have ELC, just as we predicted. So 1 through 4. And then we have the value welcome all friends for this piece of code here. And then we have welcome printed out 3 times in a row. Okay. So just so you know, these are some things that you can do with joining 2 strings and doing multiple things at the same time. It sure beats doing something 3 times in a row. That way you can be more efficient with your code by using that multiplication operator. Okay. You can also use with strings, you can use the word, the keyword in and not in to test whether a string is contained in another string. So say you're doing some sort of search function. Let's declare S1 equals to welcome. We can print out what is the word come in S1, and it should print it out as a Boolean. And then we could say come not in S1, and that should evaluate as false. This should evaluate as true. And then whenever we compare, you can also compare 2 strings together in Python, and it's done on ASCII values. And so you use these equivalencies to determine whether 2 strings are exactly the same. So so these should all, so this, does green equal to glow when we convert to ASCII values? Well, no, so it's going to print out false. Is green not equal? So that exclamation point equals to means not equal to glow, and that should evaluate as true. And then does the value of green, is it greater than or equal to glow? Well, I'm not certain what the ASCII values are off the top of the head, but we'll find out. And then you can not only use greater than or equal to, you can do less than or equal to, or you can just use less than or plain old greater than. So you can use any of those operators. So let's run this and see what our output looks like. So you can see these are all Booleans, and it's just running a true-false test to see, and all of these evaluated according to what the case was for these. You can also iterate through a string with a for loop to traverse all the characters in a string. So let's examine this. S equals to a string called welcome, and for ch, and we're just declaring a string variable called ch for each character in S. For each character in S, print the value of the character. And what it's going to do is it's going to print on each, it's going to parse through or iterate through this string and print each letter out onto a separate line. And let's print it out and let's see what it looks like. And that's exactly what it did when we ran it. It printed out each letter of that string onto its own print line. Okay, so just so you know, you can iterate through strings in that manner, not only to print but to do many other things. So in Python, you also the string class has a lot more types of helpful Boolean methods. So assume that S equals welcome. You can do some tests for whether a string is alphanumeric by s.isAlNum, and then that particular function will test whether it is alphanumeric. It'll also test whether or not it is a number. It'll also test for its lowercase. It'll also test for its uppercase. And your book gives you several different other examples that you can kind of look at. But just so you know, you can use these to test whether a string is meets specific criteria or specific data types. So you can see when I ran it, these particular values came out for each of those 4 tests. All right. You can also search for a substring in a string using different types of methods. So assume that S equals to welcome to Python. You can test whether or not a string ends in a specific substring by using the ends with function. And so you can do s.endsWith and then the value of the string that you want to test for it ending with. And you can kind of see that this can be really helpful if you're building a program that is doing text search. You might open up a text file and you want to do some sort of search in that text file. You can use these sorts of things to test for whether or not a specific text exists within that text file. You can also use the starts with to test for whether or not S starts with the word good. You can also return the index of the first matching character in the substring. So we might want to do sFind and then the word come, and it will give us where exactly in the string that match exists. So let's run this and see what happens. Oh, and we need a closing parentheses. There we go. All right, so for the first piece, does print ends with THON? Should that evaluate as true? And yes, it does. Okay. Does S end with the word good? No, it does not. Or does it start with the word good? No, it does not. It ends with this, so that evaluates as false. And then find the index of the first matching character in the substring. So print s.find, and then where we have find a match for come, and we know that that is in 0, 1, 2, 3 is where it starts, and indeed 3 is what we get out of that. So you can see how this would be helpful for searching specific strings. All right, one last piece that we want to talk about are the various types of functions whenever you want to clean up user intertext. And so a lot of times whenever you have a user interface where you're asking the user to enter data into a data field, and you want to capture that data, the user might do some horrible types of data entry, and so you can clean up that data by using some of these methods. Okay, and so this little program does some different types of basically displays a lot of those different types of methods. We ask first the user to enter a string and equivalent that to S. We want to print out S. And then we can use the .capitalize function to capitalize the first letter of S. And then we can also tell it to be all lowercase, convert it to all uppercase. And then maybe it's all uppercase or partly, then it would swap the case from upper to lower depending on what the case was. We can also do rstrip, which will take out the values at the beginning of a string, and we can do strip, which will take out the values at the end of the string. So let's run this and see what it looks like. All right, so enter a string, and I'm just going to do a bunch of different nonsensical characters that we can look at, and it will run through each of these functions. Okay. So the very first one, we can see that it just printed out the value of X. The next one, the .capitalize, gave us made the first one capital and everything else lowercase. The next one made everything lowercase. The next one made everything uppercase. This one swapped the case, so instead of this being uppercase, this becomes lowercase. So that's what swap does for the whole string. And then rstrip, actually, I didn't do that. Let's run that again because I forgot to put letters at the end. So I'm going to do some spaces because users like to do that. And then I'm going to put spaces at the end. So that way you can see what's happened here is rstrip has stripped everything to the right side of the string. And then here it has stripped everything to the left side of the string. Okay. So these are some really powerful things that you can use whenever you are converting strings, especially that for which your end users have entered data. Well, that is the lecture for this time. If you have any questions, make certain that you give me drop me a line or let me know. I'm glad to help, and have a great week. We'll talk to you later.